They ran through the groves of dead trees, leaping across the sun-baked Martian soil, running silently together. They went up a little rise, across a narrow ridge. Suddenly, Eric stopped, throwing himself down flat on the ground. The others did the same, pressing themselves against the soil, gasping for breath.
"Be silent!"
Eric muttered. He raised himself a little.
"No noise! There'll be layers nearby from now on. We don't dare take any chances."
Between the three people lying in the grove of dead trees and the city was a barren, level waste of desert, over a mile of blasted sand. No trees or bushes marred the smooth, parched surface. Only an occasional wind, a dry wind, eddying and twisting, blew the sand up into little rills. A faint odor came to them, a bitter smell of heat and sand carried by the wind. Eric pointed.
"Look! The city! There it is!"
They stared, still breathing deeply from their race through the trees. The city was close, closer than they had ever seen it before. Never had they gotten so close to it in times past. Terrans were never allowed near the great Martian cities, the centers of Martian life. Even in ordinary times, when there was no threat of approaching war, the Martians shrewdly kept all Terrans away from their citadels, partly from fear, partly from a deep, innate sense of hostility toward the white-skinned visitors whose commercial ventures had earned them the respect and the dislike of the whole system.
"How does it look to you?"
Eric said. The city was huge, much larger than they had imagined from the drawings and models they had studied so carefully back in New York, in the War Ministry office. Huge it was, huge and stark, black towers rising up against the sky, incredibly thin columns of ancient metal, columns that had stood wind and sun for centuries. Around the city was a wall of stone, red stone, immense bricks that had been lugged there and fitted into place by slaves of the early Martian dynasties, under the whiplash of the first great kings of Mars. An ancient, sun-baked city, a city set in the middle of a wasted plain beyond the groves of dead trees, a city seldom seen by Terrans, but a city studied on maps and charts in every war office on Terra. A city that contained, for all its ancient stone and archaic towers, the ruling group of all Mars, the Council of Senior Leaders, black-clad men who governed and ruled with an iron hand. The Senior Leaders, 12 fanatic and devoted men, black priests, but priests with flashing rods of fire, lie detectors, rocket ships, intraspace cannon, many more things the Terran Senate could only conjecture about. The Senior Leaders and their subordinate province leaders, Eric and the two behind him suppressed a shudder.
"We've got to be careful,"
Eric said again.
"We'll be passing among them soon. If they guess who we are, or what we're here for..."
He snapped open the case he carried, glancing inside for a second. Then he closed it again, grasping the handle firmly.
"Let's go,"
he said. He stood up slowly.
"You two come up beside me. I want to make sure you look the way you should."
Mara and Jan stepped quickly ahead. Eric studied them critically as the three of them walked slowly down the slope, onto the plain, toward the towering black spires of the city.
"Jan,"
Eric said,
"take hold of her hand. Remember, you're going to marry her. She's your bride. And Martian peasants think a lot of their brides."
Jan was dressed in the short trousers and coat of the Martian farmer, a knotted rope tied around his waist, a hat on his head to keep off the sun. His skin was dark, colored by dye until it was almost bronze.
"You look fine,"
Eric said to him. He glanced at Mara. Her black hair was tied in a knot, looped through a hollowed-out uke bone. Her face was dark, too dark and lined with colored ceremonial pigment, green and orange stripes across her cheeks. Earrings were strung through her ears. On her feet were tiny slippers of parahide, laced around her ankles, and she wore long, translucent Martian trousers, with a bright sash tied around her waist. Between her small breasts a chain of stone beads rested, good luck charms for the coming marriage.
"All right,"
Eric said. He himself wore the flowing gray robe of a Martian priest, dirty robes that were supposed to remain on him all his life, to be buried around him when he died.
"I think we'll get past the guards. There should be heavy morning traffic on the road."
They walked on, the hard sand crunching under their feet. Against the horizon they could see specks moving, other persons going toward the city. Farmers and peasants and merchants bringing their crops and goods to market.
"See the cart?"
Mara exclaimed. They were nearing a narrow road, 2 ruts worn into the sand. A Martian huffer was pulling the cart, its great sides wet with perspiration, its tongue hanging out. The cart was piled high with bales of cloth, rough country cloth, hand-dipped. A bent farmer urged the huffer on. "And there!" she pointed, smiling. A group of merchants riding small animals were moving along behind the cart. Martians in long robes, their faces hidden by sand masks. On each animal was a pack, carefully tied on with rope. And beyond the merchants, plodding dully along, were peasants and farmers, in an endless procession, some riding carts or animals, but mostly on foot. Mara and Jan and Eric joined the line of people, melting in behind the merchants. No one noticed them. No one looked up or gave any sign. The march continued as before. Neither Jan nor Mara said anything to each other. They walked a little behind Eric, who paced with a certain dignity, a certain bearing becoming his position. Once he slowed down, pointing up at the sky.
"Look,"
he muttered in the Martian hill dialect.
"See that?"
2 black dots circled lazily. Martian patrol craft. The military on the outlook for any sign of unusual activity. War was almost ready to break out with Terra. Any day. Almost any moment.
"We'll be just in time,"
Eric said.
"Tomorrow will be too late. The last ship will have left Mars."
"I hope nothing stops us," Mara said. "I want to get back home when we're through." Half an hour passed. They neared the city, the wall growing as they walked, rising higher and higher until it seemed to blot out the sky itself. A vast wall, a wall of eternal stone that had felt the wind and sun for centuries. A group of Martian soldiers were standing at the entrance, the single passage gate hewn into the rock, leading to the city. As each person went through, the soldiers examined him, poking his garments, looking into his load. Eric tensed. The line had slowed almost to a halt.
"It'll be our turn soon,"
he murmured.
"Be prepared."
"Let's hope no laters come around," Jan said. "The soldiers aren't so bad." Mara was staring up at the wall and the towers beyond. Under their feet, the ground trembled, vibrating and shaking. She could see tongues of flame rising from the towers, from the deep underground factories and forges of the city. The air was thick and dense with particles of soot. Mara rubbed her mouth, coughing.
"Here they come,"
Eric said softly. The merchants had been examined and allowed to pass through the dark gate, the entrance through the wall into the city. They and their silent animals had already disappeared inside. The leader of the group of soldiers was beckoning impatiently to Eric, waving him on. "Come along," he said. "Hurry up there, old man." Eric advanced slowly, his arms wrapped around his body, looking down at the ground. "Who are you and what's your business here?" the soldier demanded, his hands on his hips, his gun hanging idly at the waist. Most of the soldiers were lounging lazily, leaning against the wall, some even squatting in the shade. Flies crawled in the face of one who'd fallen asleep, his gun on the ground beside him.
"My business?"
Eric murmured.
"I am a village priest.
Why do you want to enter the city?"
"I must bring these 2 people before the magistrate to marry them."
He indicated Mara and Jan, standing a little behind him.
"That is the law the leaders have made."
The soldier laughed. He circled around Eric. "What do you have in that bag you carry?"
"Laundry. We stay the night."
"What village are you from?"
"Kranos."
"Kranos?" The soldier looked to a companion. "Ever heard of Kranos? A backward pigsty. I saw it once on a hunting trip." The leader of the soldiers nodded to Jan and Mara. The 2 of them advanced, their hands clasped, standing close together. One of the soldiers put his hand on Mara's bare shoulder, turning her around. "Nice little wife you're getting," he said. "Good and firm-looking." He winked, grinning lewdly. Jan glanced at him in sullen resentment. The soldiers guffawed. All right, the leader said to Eric. "You people can pass." Eric took a small purse from his robes and gave the soldier a coin. Then the 3 of them went into the dark tunnel that was the entrance, passing through the wall of stone into the city beyond. They were within the city.
"Now,"
Eric whispered.
"Hurry!"
Around them the city roared and cracked, the sound of 1,000 vents and machines shaking the stones under their feet. Eric led Mara and Jan into a corner, by a row of brick warehouses. People were everywhere, hurrying back and forth, shouting above the din. Merchants, peddlers, soldiers, street women. Eric bent down and opened the case he carried. From the case he quickly took 3 small coins of fine metal. Intricate meshed wires and veins worked through into a small cone. Jan took one and Mara took one. Eric put the remaining cone into his robe and snapped the case shut again.
Now remember, the coils must be buried in such a way that the line runs through the center of the city. We must trisect the main section, where the largest concentration of buildings is. Remember the maps. Watch the alleys and streets carefully. Talk to no one if you can help it. Each of you has enough Martian money to buy your way out of trouble. Watch especially for cut purses, and for heaven's sake, don't get lost.
Eric broke off. 2 black-clad leaders were coming along the inside of the wall, strolling together with their hands behind their backs. They noticed the 3 who stood in the corner by the warehouses and stopped.
Go,
Eric muttered.
And be back here at sundown.
He smiled grimly.
Or never come back.
Each went off in a different way, walking quickly without looking back. The leaders watched them go. The little bride was quite lovely, one leader said. Those hill people have the stamp of nobility in their blood from the old times. A very lucky young peasant to possess her, the other said. They went on. Eric looked after them, still smiling a little. Then he joined the surging mass of people that milled eternally through the streets of the city. At dusk, they met outside the gate. The sun was soon to set, and the air had turned thin and frigid. It cut through their clothing like knives. Mara huddled against Jan, trembling and rubbing her bare arms.
Well,
Eric said.
Did you both succeed?
Around them, peasants and merchants were pouring from the entrance, leaving the city to return to their farms and villages, starting the long trip back across the plain towards the hills beyond. None of them noticed the shivering girl and the young man and the old priest standing by the wall. Mine's in place, Jan said. On the other side of the city, on the extreme edge, buried by a well. Mine's in the industrial section. Mara whispered, her teeth chattering. Jan, give me something to put over me. I'm freezing.
Good, Eric said. Then the 3 coils should trisect dead center. If the models were correct.
He looked up at the darkening sky. Already stars were beginning to show. 2 dots, the evening patrol, moved slowly toward the horizon.
Let's hurry. It won't be long.
They joined the line of Martians moving along the road, away from the city. Behind them, the city was losing itself in the somber tones of night, its black spires disappearing into darkness. They walked silently with the country people until the flat ridge of dead trees became visible on the horizon. Then they left the road and turned off, walking toward the trees.
Almost time,
Eric said. He increased his pace, looking back at Jan and Mara impatiently.
Come on!
They hurried, making their way through the twilight, stumbling over rocks and dead branches, up the side of the ridge. At the top, Eric halted, standing with his hands on his hips, looking back.
See,
he murmured.
The city. The last time we'll ever see it this way.
Can I sit down? Mara said. My feet hurt me. Jan pulled at Eric's sleeve. Hurry, Eric! Not much time left! He laughed nervously. If everything goes right, we'll be able to look at it forever!
But not like this,
Eric murmured. He squatted down, snapping his case open. He took some tubes and wiring out and assembled them together on the ground. At the peak of the ridge, a small pyramid of wire and plastic grew, shaped by his expert hands. At last he grunted, standing up.
All right.
Is it pointed directly at the city? Mara asked anxiously, looking down at the pyramid. Eric nodded.
Yes, it's placed according...
He stopped, suddenly stiffening.
Get back! It's time! Hurry!
Jan ran, down the far side of the slope, away from the city, pulling Mara with him. Eric came quickly after, still looking back at the distant spires, almost lost in the night sky. Down! Jan sprawled out, Mara beside him, her trembling body pressed against his. Eric settled down into the sand and dead branches, still trying to see.
I want to see it!
He murmured.
A miracle! I want to see!
A flash. A blinding burst of violet light lit up the sky. Eric clapped his hands over his eyes. The flash whitened, growing larger, expanding. Suddenly, there was a roar, and a furious, hot wind rushed past him, throwing him on his face in the sand. The hot, dry wind licked and seared at them, crackling the bits of branches into flame. Mara and Jan shut their eyes, pressed tightly together.
God!
Eric muttered. The storm passed. They opened their eyes slowly. The sky was still alive with fire, a drifting cloud of sparks that was beginning to dissipate with the night wind. Eric stood up unsteadily, helping Jan and Mara to their feet. The three of them stood, staring silently across the dark waste, the black plain, none of them speaking. The city was gone. At last Eric turned away.
That part's done,
he said.
Now the rest. Give me a hand, Jan. There'll be 1,000 patrol ships around here in a minute.
I see one already,
Mara said, pointing up. A spot winked in the sky, a rapidly moving spot.
They're coming, Eric.
There was a throb of chill fear in her voice.
I know,
Eric said, squatting on the ground, around the pyramid of tubes and plastic pulling the pyramid apart. The pyramid was fused together like molten glass. Eric tore the pieces away with trembling fingers. From the remains of the pyramid he pulled something forth. Something he held up high, trying to make it out in the darkness. Jan and Mara came close to see, both staring up intently, almost without breathing.
There it is,
Eric said.
There!
In his hand was a globe, a small transparent globe of glass. Within the glass something moved, something minute and fragile. Spires almost too small to be seen, microscopic, a complex web swimming within the hollow glass globe. A web of spires, a city. Eric pulled the globe into the case and snapped it shut.
Let's go,
he said. They began to lope back through the trees, back the way they had come before.
We'll change in the car,
he said as they ran.
I think we should keep these clothes on until we're actually inside the car. We still might encounter someone.
I'll be glad to get my own clothing on again, Jan said. I feel funny in these little pants. How do you think I feel?
Mara gasped.
I'm freezing in this, what there is of it.
All Martian brides dress that way,
Eric said. He clutched the case tightly as they ran.
I think it looks fine.
Thank you,
Mara said.
But it is cold. What do you suppose they'll think?
Jan asked.
They'll assume the city was destroyed, won't they? That's certain.
Yes,
Eric said.
They'll be sure it was blown up. We can count on that. And it will be damn important to us that they think so.
The car should be around here someplace,
Mara said, slowing down.
No, farther on,
Eric said.
Past that little hill over there, in the ravine by the trees. It's so hard to see where we are.
Shall I light something?
Jan said.
No, there may be patrols around us. Who?
He halted abruptly. Jan and Mara stopped beside him.
What?
Mara began. A light glimmered. Something stirred in the darkness. There was a sound.
Quick!
Eric rasped. He dropped, throwing the case far away from him, into the bushes. He straightened up tensely. A figure loomed, moving through the darkness. And behind it, more figures, men, soldiers in uniform. The light flashed up brightly, blinding them. Eric closed his eyes. The light left him, touching Mara and Jan, standing silently together, clasping hands. Then it flicked down to the ground and came around in a circle. A later stepped forward, a tall figure in black, with his soldiers close behind him, their guns ready.
You there,
the later said.
Who are you? Don't move. Stand where you are.
He came up to Eric, peering at him intently, his hard Martian face without expression. He went all around Eric, examining his robes, his sleeves.
Please,
Eric began in a quavering voice, but the later cut him off.
I'll do the talking. Who are you three? What are you doing here? Speak up.
We're going back to our village,
Eric muttered, staring down, his hands folded.
We were in the city, and now we are going home.
One of the soldiers spoke into a mouthpiece. He clicked it off and put it away.
Come with me,
the later said.
We're taking you in. Hurry along.
In? Back to the city?
One of the soldiers laughed.
The city's gone,
he said.
All that's left of it you can put in the palm of your hand. But what happened?
Mara said.
No one knows. Come on, hurry it up.
There was a sound. A soldier came quickly out of the darkness.
I'll see you later,
he said.
Coming this way.
He disappeared again.
I'll see you later.
The soldier stood waiting, standing at a respectful attention. A moment later, the senior leader stepped into the light, a black-clad old man, his ancient face thin and hard, like a bird's eyes bright and alert. He looked from Eric to Jan.
Who are these people?
He demanded.
Villagers, going back home.
No, they're not. They don't stand like villagers. Villagers slump. Diet, poor food. These people are not villagers. I myself came from the hills, and I know.
He stepped close to Eric, looking keenly into his face.
Who are you? Look at his chin. He never shaved with a sharpened stone. Something is wrong here.
In his hand, a rod of pale fire flashed.
The city is gone, and with it at least half of the later council. It is very strange. A flash, then heat and wind. But it was not fission. I am puzzled. All at once, the city has vanished. Nothing is left but a depression in the sand.
We'll take them in,
the other later said.
Soldiers, surround them. Make certain that...
Run! Eric cried. He struck out, knocking the rod from the senior leader's hand. They were all running, soldiers shouting, flashing their lights, stumbling against each other in the darkness. Eric dropped to his knees, groping frantically in the bushes. His fingers closed over the handle of the case, and he leapt up. In Terran, he shouted to Mara and Jan.
Hurry! To the car! Run!
He set off, down the slope, stumbling through the darkness. He could hear soldiers behind him, soldiers running and falling. A body colliding against him, and he struck out. Someplace behind him there was a hiss, and a section of the slope went up in flames. The leader's rod.
Eric!
Mara cried from the darkness. He ran toward her. Suddenly, he slipped, falling on a stone. Confusion and firing, the sound of excited voices.
Eric! Is that you?
Jan caught hold of him, helping him up.
The car! It's over here! Where's Mara? I'm here!
Mara's voice came.
Over here by the car!
A light flashed. A tree went up in a puff of fire, and Eric felt the singe of the heat against his face. He and Jan made their way toward the girl. Mara's hand caught his in the darkness.
Now the car!
Eric said.
If they haven't got to it!
He slid down the slope into the ravine, fumbling in the darkness, reaching and holding onto the handle of the case. Reaching. He touched something cold and smooth. Metal. A metal door. Relief flooded through him.
I found it! Jan, get inside, Mara, come on!
He pushed Jan past him, into the car. Mara slipped in after Jan, her small, agile body crowding in beside him.
Stop!
A voice shouted from above them.
There's no use hiding in that ravine. We'll get you! Come up and...
The sound of voices was drowned out by the roar of the car's motor. A moment later, they shot into the darkness, the car rising into the air. Treetops broke and cracked under them as Eric turned the car from side to side, avoiding the groping shafts of pale light from below, the last furious thrusts from the two leaders and their soldiers. Then they were away, above the trees, high in the air, gaining speed each moment, leaving the knot of Martians far behind.
Toward Marsport,
Jan said to Eric. Right? Eric nodded.
Yes, we'll land outside the field in the hills. We can change back to our regular clothing there, our commercial clothing. Damn it, we'll be lucky if we can get there in time for the ship.
The last ship,
Mara whispered, her chest rising and falling.
What if we don't get there in time?
Eric looked down at the leather case in his lap.
We'll have to get there, he murmured. We must!
For a long time there was silence. Thatcher stared at Eric. The older man was leaning back in his chair, sipping a little of his drink. Mara and Jan were silent.
So you didn't destroy the city,
Thatcher said.
You didn't destroy it at all? You shrank it down and put it in a glass globe, in a paperweight? And now you're a salesman again, with a sample case of office supplies.
Erickson smiled. He opened the briefcase, and reaching into it, he brought up the glass globe paperweight. He held it up, looking into it.
Yes, we stole the city from the Martians. That's how we got by the lie detector. It was true that we knew nothing about a destroyed city.
But why?
Thatcher said.
Why steal a city? Why not merely bomb it? Ransom,
Mara said fervently, gazing into the globe, her dark eyes bright.
Their biggest city, half of their council, in Erickson's hand.
Mars will have to do what Terra asks, Erickson said. Now Terra will be able to make her commercial demands felt. Maybe there won't even be a war. Perhaps Terra will get her way without even fighting.
Still smiling, he put the globe back into the briefcase and locked it.
Quite a story,
Thatcher said.
What an amazing process. Reduction of size, A whole city reduced to microscopic dimensions. Amazing. No wonder you were able to escape. With such daring as that, no one could hope to stop you.
He looked down at the briefcase on the floor. Underneath them, the jets murmured and vibrated evenly as the ship moved through space toward distant Terra.
We still have quite a way to go,
Jan said.
You've heard our story, Thatcher. Why not tell us yours? What sort of line are you in? What's your business? Yes,
Mara said.
What do you do? What do I do?
Thatcher said.
Well, if you like, I'll show you.
He reached into his coat and brought out something that flashed and glinted, something slender, a rod of pale fire. The three stared at it, sickened to shock settling over them slowly. Thatcher held the rod loosely, calmly, pointing it at Erickson.
We knew you three were on the ship,
he said.
There was no doubt of that, but we did not know what had become of the city. My theory was that the city had not been destroyed at all, that something else had happened to it. Council members measured a sudden loss of mass in that area, a decrease equal to the mass of the city. Somehow, the city had been spirited away, not destroyed. But I could not convince the other councilators of it. I had to follow you alone.
Thatcher turned a little, nodding to the men sitting at the bar. The men rose at once, coming toward the table.
A very interesting process you have. Mars will benefit a great deal from it. Perhaps it will even turn the tide in our favor. When we return to Marsport, I wish to begin work on it at once. And now, if you will please pass me the briefcase.